Greetings, greetings, greetings. Welcome back to another installment of Reparations Now podcast. I'm your host, Brother Jumoke Ifetayo. And today, unlike on other shows where we have special guests, today I am your guest, your host and your guest. So, first of all, as we are been moving into a new cycle in the Gregorian calendar, and this also being our story month, I just wanted to take a pause and just to honor the creator and the ancestors and to um, to ground this show in the energy of spirit. I just realized I've been doing so many of these shows, and we wanted to make sure that we begin to continue to do that on a consistent basis. Ashe. So please take time to share this video with friends, like, subscribe to our channel. I want to thank my brother in advance, Brother Major, because we worked really hard to put this show together. And this is going to be power packed show. You're going to learn a lot about the reparations movement. And we're consolidating a whole course of reparations into a 1 hour show. So we're going to see how that goes, how that works out. So when I think about reparations, just to begin to set the tone, is that reparations is about how we work to repair ourselves, and sometimes they may look like repatriation. Those who have wanted to go back to Africa, there's been movements all throughout our sojourn here in the United States and in the Caribbean and Central South America of people going back to Africa at different periods and times, even now. And so that's one form. And then there's another form of reparations that looks at how we move from uh, having self-governing ourselves. And I'll get into that a little bit later, and setting up our own communities or towns, even nations. And so that's one form. And then there's the redress form of reparations, where we seek to get redress from the government or from corporations or institutions. And so we're going to go into that a little bit. So let's start the show. We said 10 things that you should know about reparations. We're probably going to give you dozens of things that you should know about reparations movement by the time this show is over. But I tried to categorize them in 10 areas so we can hit those 10 areas and then move through those 10 areas. And so the first thing is always grounding ourselves in the definition of reparations. A lot of people have different perspectives and views on reparations. So we in Cobra has put forward a definition that we feel could be a standard definition for the reparations movement. So we define reparations is a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments, corporations, institutions, and families. So I'm going to actually read that again. Reparations is a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments, corporations, institutions, and families. But we're going to continue to unpack the definition of reparations. As I've said, in just finished talking about when I joined in Cobra, I learned what our elders considered the three roads to reparations. Those who want to go back to Africa and repatriate. As I said, there's been lots of movements to do that, from Paul Cuffey in Liberia and Sierra Leone, as well as Marcus Garvey, as well as several other movements that have put forward that notion. And even now, there are a lot of African Americans, not a lot, but there are African Americans who are repatriating and returning home. Ghana in 2019 has something called the Year of Return, where many people return and people are moving back to Africa and other places as well. Another option is the sovereign nation. We feel that some activists and those in the movement feel like we should have our own nation carved out of the United States. One of those options, one of those examples you saw on the screen was the Republic of New Africa. And then there is those who want to continue to assimilate inside of the United States. Now, the next aspect of the United Nations of the reparations definition is the United Nations 5 forms of full repair reparations. And to me, this is central. If anyone is not completely grounded in this form of reparations, to me, they're not grounded in the whole holistic aspect and nature of what reparations means. So the first thing that reparations talks about is cessation and non-repetition. This is coming again from the United Nations. So that means that the crimes that are still happening to people of African descent right now, even as we have this conversation, have to end. And not only end, but we have to be creative and design our reparations in such a way that they don't happen in the future. So that's a tremendous amount of work that we have to do in that area. The next aspect of reparations is restitution. So restitution looks at our legal standing. It looks at things like loss of culture, loss of ways of being and doing. You know, I just came back from a workshop where the brother was talking about many of the food ways that we've lost and the foods that we used to eat that are particularly strengthen our body that we no longer eat or not familiar with because we're over here on this side of the water. So that's a whole aspect called restitution and looks at things like our legal standing. Even right now in this country, there's questioning around the 14th Amendment, and even the 14th Amendment was imposed on us. We didn't agree. They didn't ask us if we wanted to be citizens of the United States. They imposed that. And again, they could have given us the option of going back to Africa or having our sovereign nation state. Rehabilitation looks at restoring our health, as well, physical as well as mental health. And then there's compensation. Of course, we don't leave our compensation. Compensation is on the table because a lot of what we want to do, what we need to do to heal ourselves requires financial resources. And then there's satisfaction, looking at telling the narrative of our people. The narrative is so important in our understanding of our story of who we are to ourselves and who we are to the world. So satisfaction also looks at memorials, commemorations, special days of honoring, and things like that. The United Nations has also introduced some of those days as well on international level. So that's number one, getting grounded on the definition of reparation. Number two is 40 acres and a mule. Oops, we left out self-repair. I apologize. Self-repair is also a part of the definition of reparations. Self-repair looks at what are the things that we need to do to heal ourselves. And really all of reparations, I say, is self-repair. However, we're saying we want the government to set the precedent so we can have the room and the space and the resources so that we can work on ourselves, because no one else can heal us but us. And so this is a very powerful quote. I'm not going to read it, but it's a very powerful quote by Professor Chinwezu that was offered up at the reparations conference, Pan-African Reparations Conference that was held in Abuja in 1993. All right. So now we'll go on to number two, which is 40 acres and a mule. Most people have heard of that expression, but many times it hasn't been broken down for you like it needs to be broken down. So we're going to break it down a little bit. So how we get to 40 acres and a mule is that we have a conversation with General Sherman along with 20 ministers in Savannah on January the 13th, 1865. This is when the Civil War is about to end. And he determines, so he has a meeting with the ministers, and Brother Garrison Frazier, who was chosen as the spokesperson for the group, and so he asked him, General Stanton asked Reverend Frazier, who had bought himself free with $1,000 in gold and silver. Imagine that. And so he asked him a series of questions. And one of the questions is, what is it that you would like? Slavery is about to end. What is it that you feel that you need in order for people of African descent to be made whole? And so he says that we would be satisfied if we just have land, because with land, we can till the land. We know how to take care of the land and be prosperous, how to take care of ourselves on that land. And so then the next question he asked, all right, thank you. So this is an actual painting from that meeting with the ministers and General Stanton and General Sherman. And so he asked them, well, would you want that land to be scattered amongst the whites, or do you want to be separate by yourself? And he says that we would prefer to be separate by ourselves. And so with this particular question, though, he said, I may not speak for everyone. I always found that interesting because he was already chosen to be the spokesperson. So they decided to have to ask each minister who was gathered there for their confirmation on that or disagreement. And all of the ministers, with the exception of one young minister from Maryland, not going to pick on him today, said that yes, they would like to be separate. And so when Sherman issues was called Sherman's Field Order 15 on January 16th, 1865. He says that this would be a separate territory. You can go to the next slide. He says that this would be a separate territory, a territory only for people formerly enslaved Africans that would have a military buffer and that they would govern themselves. And this was a specific swath of land. This was from Charleston, South Carolina, 30 miles inland, and then coming down to just below Jacksonville, where the St. John River meets. And so that is the 40 acres, and the mule wasn't a part of it. And just another point of mention is that it was actually up to 40 acres. And everyone didn't receive 40 acres. As a matter of fact, I just remembered, I have right here, some years ago, working in the Atlanta chapter of Vancouver, we had some young people that went and pulled some deeds. I guess you can't really see that too well, but this is some deeds of the people who actually got 40 acres in the mule, because some 40 acres of land. There's some people say, oh, it was a promise. It wasn't a promise. Land was actually given out. Now it was taken back later on, and you had the Freedmen's Bureau that came. That was no, sir. The Freedmen's Bureau who continue to act as a liaison between the government and enslaved Africans, but it primarily did things like provide food and clothing and sort of act as like a agency, like I guess you think of the Red Cross or something like that to help the formerly enslaved Africans. And then that Freedmen's Bureau ended in 1872. Just a few years after it was started in 1865, right? Which we have the end of what's called the Reconstruction period. So now, as we continue to journey into point number 3, which is something that people should be familiar with, this movement, if you're wanting to know more about reparations movement, is called the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. And our star organizer with that was a sister known as Callie House. You see her on the screen, along with Reverend Isaiah Dickinson. And the idea was that enslaved Africans were still alive at this point. We're talking in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, when she begins to put these ideas forward. And she was familiar with the troops getting a pension after the Civil War. And so she thought that our enslaved Africans who already had worked there most of their lives should be taken care of the government in some minimal way. Think of like Social Security, so that they would get a certain amount of money just to keep them to be able to take care of themselves in their last years of life. And so she had organized this organization and had over 300,000 people that joined this organization. It was very powerful. And one of the things that they did also was they provided funds, burial funds for those enslaved Africans. So again, think like life insurance, right? This is, again, our own ancestors putting together these institutions for ourselves. And so that was Callie House and the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Fund Association. See if I wanted to hit on some other points related to that. I think that was pretty much, I think we covered that. Also, we should say that the United States government put her in jail, saying because of mail fraud. And what they said was that, the United States government ain't going to give y'all no reparations. So you're really just tricking your people to think that they might get reparations. And so she was tried by all male, all white jury and found guilty and went to jail. And that helped to really begin the demise of her organization. And so It is theorized, though, that some of the infrastructure from her organization, though, ended up helping to support Marcus Garvey and his movement. So we lift up Reverend Isaiah Dickinson and the good work of Sister Callie House. So let's move to our point number 4. Number 4, we're going to talk about HR 40. So HR 40, so HR 40 comes about primarily with a conversation, we'll say, with a woman named Queen Mother Dorothy Benton Lewis, who's now an ancestor, who's an active reparations activist. I think starting, her history goes probably back to the 60s. This is in the 1980s at this point. And this is around the time when the Japanese are getting reparations for their time in the internment camp. And so she spoke with a brother named Dr. Mario Badelli, President Mario Badelli at the time, about pulling together a coalition of organizations to re-energize or to energize the call for reparations. Many of these organizations already supported reparations, but there was no single focus just on reparations. And so in 1988, 1987, they began to meet, and they called, NCOBRA came into existence. And we was going to talk about NCOBRA later, but it's all relevant. So, but at the same time, you had a brother in Detroit who was also whispering in the ear of Congressman John Conyers about putting a similar bill putting a bill and then a similar bill into office, modeled after how the Japanese got reparations. And so Congressman Conyers did take that challenge up and issued a bill, and that's now known as HR 40, and put that in Congress in 1989 and continued to introduce it every year while he was in office. And then it was passed on to, you can see in the purple, Sister Sheila Jackson Lee took up the charge. And she took up the charge with much fire and much passion, and helped to really advance HR 40 and her, along with the community, we were able to get close. We got 14 co-sponsors on that bill. We also had hearings on that bill. Also, a precedent that happened during is that Brother Cory Booker, Senator Cory Booker, I should say, issued a companion bill to HR 40. Since this is like the first time since enslavement period, or right after the enslavement period, that a bill that calling for reparations was introduced in the House and in the Senate. And then on June 19, 2019, there was a very historical congressional hearing on this bill. Danny Glover spoke, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and many other people spoke at that, including Cory Booker. And this is a very important precedent when a bill has a congressional hearing. And so many people turned out for that meeting. I was actually there myself. I think they had at least 4, I'm going to say minimum 4 overflow rooms for us. They had no idea that many people were going to show up for that congressional hearing on HR 40. But HR 40 basically is a commission bill initially it was just a study bill, and then it turned in, and then we updated the bill January 3rd, 2017, to make it not just a study bill, but a bill to call for reparations proposals. This work was led by NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, and Brother Cam Howard, who you see there at the bottom of the screen. And so what we did was the bill was upgraded. And one of the ways that the bill was upgraded was, 1, like I said, to call for reparations proposals, 2, to include those United Nations 5 forms of reparations that I mentioned early in the beginning of this presentation, and also to add the commission is made up by appointments of the government. And so it was added 6 appointments from civil society, your legacy and reparations organizations to also be appointed to this commission. And so those were the additions that were made to HR 40, and Conyers accepted those proposals. And like I said, they were carried forward by Sheila Jackson Lee, and right now they're being carried forward by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. And so HR 40 has been an organizing tool for the reparations movement. If you're not familiar with HR 40, incident reparations, you definitely should become more familiar with HR 40. Look it up and look up some of the work that I've just mentioned that has happened around it. What did I say? 218 yes vote confirmations, as well as 20 co-sponsors um, in the Senate in 2022. Now we know that the government has shifted, and so the work at the federal level is still in play, but we're putting less energy on that and on that work because we know we have a Republican conservative House, Senate, and presidency at this time. So, point number 5, we're moving along. Don't want to go too fast. Don't want to go too fast, but point number 5 is yes, lawsuits, lawsuits, and so there have been various attempts to um, advance the conversation, advance justice for our people through lawsuits in terms of reparations. And there's a couple of challenges with that. One of the challenges, and I'm not a law expert, I just know some of this, but one of the two of the main challenges with launching a lawsuit, particularly against the federal government, is one is called statute of limitations, meaning that those people who are the victim of the crime have a certain amount of time that they have to um, pursue justice on that particular crime. However, we say that the injustice of enslavement as well as Jim Crow, as well as continued discrimination, has never ended. It's just transformed into different ways. And so we're still victims even today. And then there's also something called sovereign immunity. And what that means is that the government can determine if they will allow you to sue them because they have something called sovereign immunity. So those two things have been obstacles. I know a lot of people say, why don't we just sue the government? Just sue the government because we're such a litigious society, and people see, these court TV shows and everything, just think, oh, we could just sue the government, but it's not quite that easy. But this sister who you see on the screen, Deirdre Farmer Pellman, uh, was inspired by the work of Cobra and says she went to law school so that she could raise lawsuit for reparations and for our people. And what she did, though, she took a different strategy and decided to focus on corporations because those corporations are still an entity today that violated and harmed our people. And so she launched, along with several other top-notch lawyers and activists, scholar activists and leaders, a lawsuit. And that lawsuit was not successful. There's also been other lawsuits. There's been a lawsuit which I'm just now need to do a little more research on, called Cato versus the United States, and that lawsuit was in 1995. And that lawsuit, and I'm reading here, Cato's complaint seeks compensation of $100 million for forced ancestral indoctrination into a foreign society, kidnapping of ancestors from Africa, forced labor, breakup of families, removal of traditional values, deprivations of freedom, and imposition of oppression, intimidation, miseducation, and lack of information about various aspects of their indigenous character. She also requests that the court order an acknowledgement of the injustice of slavery in the United States and in the 13 American colonies between 1619 and 1865, as well as the existence of discrimination against freed slaves and their descendants from the end of Civil War to the present. In addition, she seeks an apology from the United States. So this is a lawsuit, but that's Deidre Farmer Pellman's lawsuit. Thank you. That's up on the screen. But what I was reading from was a lawsuit called Cato versus the United States that was also not successful. There's also been the Tulsa. Many of us are familiar with the Black Wall Street, and what the actual community was called Greenwood, and how how a white mob came and basically just destroyed the town, dropped a bomb from the air, burned the homes down, looted the homes. That was one of the wealthiest black communities at that time in the United States. They had their own banks, they had their own airport, they had their own grocery stores, they had their own hotels, their own movie theaters, literally hundreds of businesses. They say that you could live there as a black person and not ever have to do business or interact with anybody other than a black person because they had all of the businesses that they needed to be successful. And again, that lawsuit is still, there's gone under, as there's been different iterations of that lawsuit from what I understand, but it still at this point has not been successful um, as a lawsuit in terms of Tulsa. That was, again, another strategy was that instead of maybe trying to fight the whole uh, issue of reparations on the national level, maybe take a bite-sized chunk, which would be which was Tulsa was chosen, but that hasn't proven to be successful either. All right, so lawsuits have been tried, not been successful as of yet, and so point number 6 is the fact that we know that reparations is not that like radical of an idea or thought because it has been applied to the United States has paid reparations as well as other countries have paid reparations. The United States paid reparations to the former enslaved plantation owners in D.C. and paid them, not our ancestors, but paid them because of the loss of property and the values that they lost by losing enslaved persons on their plantations. And so the United States paid reparations to them. The United States has paid reparations to various Native American and indigenous groups in the form of land, in the form of casinos, and in the form of money. And so we know also, as I mentioned earlier, there was a reparations payment to the Japanese. And the Japanese were put in internment camps, and many of them were citizens, but they were still there was put out that they were considered a threat to United States security. So they were put in these internment camps in tents, like out in the deserts in Nevada and Arizona. And after that period ended, they began to fight and demand reparations. And as I mentioned earlier, when I was talking about in co-performing, they were successful in that. And yes, the United States paid 1.6 billion in reparations to over 82,000 Japanese Americans who were interred during World War II. This was in the form of $20,000 payments to each surviving individual, and also if they had descendants who their parents had died, that the descendants were also given reparations as well. And it's also important to note, there's something that's often not always lifted up in the reparations movement, is that there were Japanese who fought against going into these internment camps, and they were put in jail. And part of their reparations payment was amnesty for those who were put in prison for rebelling against the internment camps. And this is significant because we have not many, we have some brothers and sisters who are in jail today from the 60s and 70s and from the work that they've done on behalf of Black people who are political prisoners and prisoners of war. They should be released as a part of our reparations demand. Matter of fact, they should be top of the list of one of our reparations demands. And so um, they were also given what was created was an education fund. And in that education fund, it was to educate Japanese as well as the American public about what happened to them. Again, that goes back to when we talk about the United Nations forms of reparations, and we talk about satisfaction. I think there was a picture of Ronald Reagan signing into law. A picture of I appreciate my tech brother Major is working with me. I got some of this information to him at the last minute. So yeah, that's a picture of President Ronald Reagan signing what was called the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, in which the Japanese were given reparations um, for people of African. The Japanese were given reparations for being in the internment camps. Yeah, so we know that, like I said, the United States uh, has paid back reparations, and there's also been other local reparations efforts as well. We know that some of the descendants of Rosewood, where there was another massacre in the 1920s in Florida, and that they were given reparations as well. And there's been other examples of there's the story of Bruce's Beach, which the city took from a black family in California, which was prime real estate on the beachfront. They had their own store and hotel and restaurant and nightclub and everything. And that land was taken from them, and then the county gave it back to their descendants. And so again, that's another form of reparations. So again, and this idea of reparations is not something that is far-fetched or extreme or radical. This is something, and yes, and we're going to come to that in a minute, brother. California and local reparations. We'll come back to that. Before we get there, we want to talk a little bit about some other forms of reparations that have happened, not just in terms of government, but also in terms of religious denominations. So one of the great stories that sort of begin to one of the great stories that set some precedent for this journey for church denominations supporting reparations is a movement called the Black Manifesto. And the Black Manifesto was led by a brother named James Foreman. James Foreman, there was a conference in Detroit that was held right after a year after Martin Luther King. Thank you. A year after Martin Luther King was assassinated in April of 1969. And at that conference, James Foreman put forward what he called the Black Manifesto. And the Black Manifesto was a challenge to the Jewish and to church organizations and church denominations to start the reparations movement. And the Black Manifesto was clearly outlined how the money would be used. He had earmarked money. He called for $500 million, and he had broken that down in terms of money going for communications in the Black community, for setting up radio stations, or printing press, or producing books. He had an idea of how we would interact more with our brothers and sisters and doing trade with our brothers and sisters in Africa. Various different money to support Black farmers, various different initiatives that he put forward in the Black Manifesto. And that was the weekend of April 26 in 1969. And it was the people at that conference voted on it and supported it. And then the next strategy was he began to engage in some civil disobedience, as we call it, nonviolent direct action. And so the very next weekend, he went to Riverside Church in New York and interrupted the church service and walked down to the pulpit and demanded reparations. And other people began to do similar types of actions. They also went to some of their national meetings when these different denominations would have their national meetings, Episcopal Church, Presbyterian Church, Catholic Church, and others. He would go to those meetings, and activists would go to those meetings and disrupt those meetings and make the call for reparations, because the idea was that the church represents the moral arm of America, so to speak, and that they should, if anybody, should understand, the great harm that was done and the importance of atoning and making amends for that harm that was done, so that the church community would be the logical place to begin reparations and repair in the Black community, would be starting with the churches. And so what happened at that time was that different churches responded different ways. Some church denominations said, yeah, you're right, we are guilty, and we do want to make amends, but we're going to choose how we do that. We're going to put money into create. Sometimes they create their own organization or commission to put money into different Black or programs that help the Black community at that time. And then some other churches, denominations said, well, we already have programs that were supporting African Americans, and so we're just going to continue to do that. And then, of course, there were some churches that said, no, we're just not going to do anything. And so that was how that unfolded. But coming into, I'll say, the late 90s and early 2000s, you began to have different church denominations, and even more recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, you've had a lot more church denominations who have now beginning, as the organizing for reparations has increased, and the call for reparations has increased, have decided that they will take it upon themselves to begin to set up reparations funds. And so the Episcopal Church, I think, would be one of the groups that's really led the way, particularly in the Northeast, Virginia diocese. That's the article that we see up on the screen, has put forward $10 million for reparations and creating a reparations fund. The Maryland diocese and New York diocese of Episcopal Church. So the churches have some of the church denominations have begun to move on that. Also, the Jesuits have put forward a pledge of $100 million to begin to address the issue of reparations. The Presbyterian Church, the United Methodist Church, the Union of Reform Judaism, which is a particular group within the Jewish faith tradition. They have taken on the call for reparations. And so all of these denominations and churches are at various stages. Some of them set up reconciliation circles or committees, or reparations committees. And some of them, like I said, have even gone further and actually have pledged money and even began to give money to the Black community in the form as in the spirit of reparations. And also, I just wanted to add, while we're on churches, that we've had how do I want to say this? The Black church has not been as engaged in the reparations movement as we would like. And however, I've been beginning to see more and more evidence of the Black churches getting more and more involved in this reparations movement and demanding reparations as well. And so just recently, the AME Church passed a resolution to support the reparations movement. And we had Brother Reverend Turner, who's the one who authored that resolution for the AME diocese. So we're AME Church denomination. And so we're excited. We're glad that is happening. I just saw something about the National Black Church organization that is just recently in 2024 agreed to begin to support and get behind the reparations movement. So this is, again, we're breaking this down into different categories of things that are important in the reparations movement to be more familiar with, right? So that was number 7. We are up to number 8, colleges and universities. There's been movement with some of the Ivy League universities, but even some of the smaller colleges around this conversation around reparations. Brown University, Princeton University, Harvard University has put up a fund of $100 million. And again, I'm not excited about any of these numbers. All these numbers, for me, just represent that they are moving in the right direction. We're going to continue to demand more, continue to organize, and continue to fight. But at least they are honoring the spirit of this reparations movement and honoring the work of the reparations movement, and beginning to take some steps in the right direction. And so Georgetown University is probably the case that's been in the news the most, I would say, or the most well-known case. And this is based on the fact that at a certain point in time, and I don't remember the exact date, but around at a certain point in time during the enslavement period still, the Georgetown University was about to be bankrupt. And so what they did to come out of bankruptcy is they sold their enslaved Africans, 272 of them. So there's a movement called the GU 272, and the descendants of those 272 people who were sold, they were sold to plantations down in Louisiana. And so a lot of work has been done to identify their descendants. I don't know what the numbers are. I think it's something like, it's over 10,000, I believe, that descendants that they have identified from that particular sale. And so students themselves at Georgetown said, we want this to be addressed. We want this issue to be addressed. The administration wasn't really moving on it, and the students at Georgetown took a poll themselves or passed a resolution, I should say, themselves to tax themselves to create a fund for reparations because of this history. But the university has now since gone on board to do more. As you see in this article right here, Georgetown launched its $400,000 annual fund to support descendants of the enslaved. And then also there have been other colleges, particularly two seminary colleges. Again, interesting, the confluence of church and college. So you have Princeton Theological Seminary is one of the universities that has a seminary school that has put forward a fund to support reparations. Then also in Virginia, you had a Virginia Theological Seminary, which has also put forward a fund and has begun paying descendants who helped to build that university, that seminary school, and people in the community in general. So so reparations is happening on different levels, whether you're talking about colleges and universities, whether you're talking about church denominations, whether you're talking about city and state level and different levels, the reparations is beginning to is happening. And a lot of times people ask me, do you think we're going to get reparations? I said, we already getting it. That's the narrative. That's the narrative. It's already happening. Now, the full reparations that I introduced at the beginning of the show definition, we at the national level, we're not there yet, but it is moving. All right. Number 9, I'm calling this NCOBRA / other organizations. And again, next time we do this, we'll have a little chart with all these other organizations that have been doing good work and have gone on record in supporting reparations. But I already talked about the how NCOBRA came into being, and once NCOBRA started with that calling of different leaders and organizations by Mario Badelli, along with Queen Mother Dorothy Benton Lewis, and NCOBRA began to, like I said, organize around HR 40, but also just began to organize around educating people around reparations. I remember when I joined NCOBRA in 1996, that when I would talk to people about reparations, even just saying the word, people were not familiar with it. So we've come a long way since then. And a lot of times I would have to say 40 acres and a mule, which people knew a little bit about, at least they had heard that term. And so but then almost every single time, as soon as I say we go from reparations to 40 acres and a mule, before I could even go any further, they say that ain't gonna never happen, or do you think that will ever happen, or something in the negative around reparations being realistic. And so, like I said, so we've come a long way from those days in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when those people who were calling for reparations was seen as extreme or radical or something that was not possible. And so I just want to lift up a few names of some other people who have contributed to the forward flow of the reparations movement. So right there behind me actually is a picture of Queen Mother Moore. Queen Mother Moore built several organizations and contributed a lot to the reparations movement. She took a petition to the president with 1 million signatures on it in support of reparations. She took petitions to the United Nations, I believe, in 1957 and 1959 to argue for reparations, to make the claim for reparations. Queen Mother Moore was an inspiration to many of the people who joined in COBRA. They were familiar with her. She was at the Gary Conference in 1972, pushing reparations. So long-term activist for reparations. She died I think she was close to 197, 98 when she transitioned, but spent basically a lifetime from being influenced from Marcus Garvey in her youth, spending most of her adult life focusing on reparations. And we did a whole show on Queen Mother Moore. So I do like Amy Goodman say, if you want to know more about Queen Mother Moore, that was a very good show too, by the way, by Dr. Ashley. And so you can check out Queen Mother Moore and check out our show that we did on Queen Mother Moore. I learned a lot about Queen Mother Moore myself. And lift up a few other names. There's a brother named Dr. Brock, who's also now an ancestor. He had a group organization called the Self-Determination Movement, focused on reparations. Another organization, December 12th Movement, human rights organization. Like I said, they were one of the ones that were responsible for organizing around the World Conference Against Racism. Oh, yeah, we haven't really got to that yet. We'll come to that. And then there's the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. When I was talking about those 3 roads, I mentioned that there was a formation that was focusing on us getting our own nation state, looking at the states of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. And so those 5 states would be our nation state. And so a government was created to begin to move forward on creating our own nation. But us having our own nation state in and of itself is a reparations demand. And in the Declaration of Independence, they included reparations. And when one of the first campaign that the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa launched was a grassroots campaign for reparations, particularly about organizing a plebiscite. So a plebiscite is a national vote. Like I said before, our ancestors weren't asked, did we want to go back to Africa, or do we want to stay in the United States, or do we want to have our own separate territory? They weren't really asked that, in a formal way, other than that meeting I mentioned with General Sherman. And so the call for a plebiscite, and we've seen this in other nations. Again, this is a part of international law, where a group of people who feel oppressed or feel like they want to separate, they're able to have a vote amongst themselves to determine which way they want to move forward. And so this is something that the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa has pushed forward as a strategy for reparations. I want to lift up a brother named Claude Anderson, who is still with us. He has put forward he has pushed for reparations. He makes the argument that we're kind of like economically locked out of this country, that most of the wealth in this country just simply gets passed down from family to family, and there's not a lot that we can do to impact that. And the only thing that could make a difference in our economic well-being would be reparations. So we lift up. Many people don't know Martin Luther King was an activist. As an activist, supported the idea of reparations. I've been collecting quotes and information from his writings, from his sermons, where he supported reparations. We know that, I Have a Dream speech. At the beginning of the speech, which they don't talk about that much, he talks about the bounce check that America owes to Black people. They've given them a check that's come back insufficient funds, but we don't believe that the vault of justice is insufficient. And then in the later days, right before he was assassinated, when he was planning the march on the Poor People's March, Poor People's Campaign, and there's a video of him calling for, when we go to Washington, we're going to get our check. And he talks about how the United States government supported Europeans, Americans, by the Homestead Act, by giving them resources to learn how to farm, by even giving them resources not to farm. And yet, they have a problem with supporting people of African descent and undergirding our giving us an economic floor to stand on. I want to lift up Dorothy Height, who's not always lifted up. She's one of the with the Legacy organization. She's also an ancestor now with our Legacy organization, and she was with I need to speed this up a little bit. National Council of Negro Women. We want to lift up Trans Africa, Randall Robinson, and the great work they did. We want to lift up National African American Reparations Commission, also known as NARC, and we want to recognize some of the younger groups that have come into the fold, ADOS, AF, American Descendants of Slavery Advocacy Foundation, the Foundational Black Americans, also known as FBA. The Movement for Black Lives has been supportive of the reparations movement. And so we're going to move off of that note and move into number 10, which is local reparations. So we are so inspired and thankful by a sister named Robin Ruth Simmons, who has who was dedicated and fearless in terms of figuring out how to get municipal reparations in her city of Evanston, outside of Illinois, and creating a fund of creating a fund where $25,000 is given to, initially it was just given to people to help them with housing, because that was determined as the number one issue in the community, redlining and gentrification. And so $25,000 to help people stay in their home, remodel their home, pay off their home, or what have you. And so, but they also now give out cash payments, and they're now, I think they're in their third or fourth year. They have given up to $6 million to people in Evanston, Illinois. But what's important also about Evanston, Illinois, is that Evanston, Illinois has inspired cities all around the United States to do the same thing. So now there are over 100 cities now that are creating reparations commissions and are working towards moving in a similar vein as Evanston. So we could go from Detroit to Philadelphia to Chicago to Los Angeles to Seattle to like I said, I can't even name all of the cities, but so many cities. And also we want to lift up many states that have legislation to create reparations commissions. The state of New York recently stood up their reparations commission. California had set up their commission, and they did their work for 2 years and turned in a very strong report on recommendations. I think they had something like 113 recommendations that they made to the California state legislature. I'm leaving out other cities. It's other states, the state of Illinois, the state of New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Illinois has passed their reparations commission. States like New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Vermont and many other states, primarily in the Northeast, Massachusetts, are still working on reparations at the state level. So that's point number 10. So we accomplished our goal, but there's so much I wanted to talk about and so many things. So we're going to give you 2 bonus ones real quick as we close out. And so one is the Pan-African Reparations Movement. And so we have been organizing, as I mentioned, there was in 2001. Well, there's actually been several international conferences. There was a conference in Abuja, which is a whole story we should do a show on, in 1993 in Abuja, Nigeria, called by MKO Abiola. Then there's been several Pan-African conferences called in Ghana and in other places. And what's one of the most important aspects around international reparations movement was the World Conference Against Racism, where slavery was declared a crime against humanity. And that's significant because, as I was talking about the lawsuits earlier, crimes against humanity, there is no statute of limitations. And so that particular victory gives the foundation of people of African descent, wherever they are in the United States, in the Caribbean, Central South America, Africa, to stand on making the demand for reparations. And coming past, yes, and so in addition to the World Conference Against Racism, again, that's a whole tough show in and of itself as well. Coming out of that, there was a program of action which calls for reparations, and following that, there was something called the International Year for People of African Descent. That was in 2011. And then in 2015 was the International Decade for People of African Descent. And then there was the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And now we're into this, just beginning the second decade for people, International Decade for People of African Descent. And all of this is organized, these formations that I'm mentioning, coming from the United Nations, are ways that we've been able to organize and strategize with our other brothers and sisters who are fighting for reparations in Europe, in Central South America. Also, I should mention the CARICOM, and CARICOM around 2014, 2015, 2013, 2014 began a campaign to focus on reparations as well. All the heads of state of the CARICOM nations, about 13, 14 countries, agreed that they need to come together and focus on reparations. So each nation was tasked with setting up a reparations task force within their nation, and then being a part of a CARICOM-wide reparations task force. And they have been moving on reparations as well, and are very involved in this international work that I mentioned as well. And so that's number 11 for your bonus. And number 12 for your bonus is reparations culture. We started this show with a song that I love by Sounds of Blackness on reparations, but there's been many songs that have been produced on reparations. Going back to 1965 is the earliest recorded song that I've identified by Oscar Brown Jr. About reparations. And then coming after that, you had the Staple Singers, who did a song, When Will We Be Paid? That came out in 1969. And then in 1972, you have Gil Scott-Heron, Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul. And coming again into the 80s and 90s, you have lots of grassroots artists and hip hop artists referencing reparations, talking about reparations. Now we have films and documentaries that have come out on reparations, and plays that have come out on reparations. We've had reparations mentioned in movies like Barbershop, and reparations mentioned. Reparations show was done on the TV episode series called Atlanta. Did a whole show on reparations. And so I just wanted to, I think it's important to lift up reparations culture. So there is reparations music being created. There's reparations, like I said, movies, documentaries. It's being mentioned in plays and television and things like that. So that's your bonus to reparations culture and the Pan-African Reparations Movement. And so on that note, I think we're pretty much, we were thinking about playing a little clip from Erica Alexander. Let's go ahead and play a little clip from Erica Alexander, just a little snippet about her testifying at the California Reparations Task Force. I think it's a good way to close up this conversation on reparations culture. Erica Alexander, as you may know, was a living single actress and has been in other TV shows and movies as well.
I have to say, I'm really excited. So if you feel me, coming off this a little bit hot, it's just that I've been waiting a very long time to have the opportunity. I hope I'll do well. Here we go. Hello, my thanks to the California Task Force for the invitation, to Miss Alicia Turner for getting me here, and my friend screenwriter C.S. Trotman for her help. She helped me get prepared today. I appreciate the work to speak with you today. I've been trying to get government attention for a while, so if I'm here now, that means all my good troublemaking has not been in vain. My name is Erica Alexander, and I'm an actress. I've been an actress for nearly 36 years. You may have seen my work, and if you haven't, there's still time. Don't worry. Thank goodness for syndication. But through the years, I've expanded my skill set and added to my resume. Now I'm a writer, producer, director, and co-founder of Color Farm Media. We call ourselves the Motown of film, television, and tech. And I had to learn those skills in order to survive and thrive in a business that has for years traded on toxic narratives that were designed to create me and minority communities as the other. We have made progress, and for that I am grateful to those who paved the way, and for abolitionist creators determined to destroy those stereotypes. But along the way, I learned a thing or two about being human and influencing narratives, so I can bear witness to the power of story as a mighty tool towards making reparations for African Americans today and in the future. So here's what I want to talk about. Storytelling. If you ain't in the storytelling business, you ain't in the game. Everything is about narratives, everything. And those who control the narratives control the world. Activists. I'll tell you what I learned from great activists who are for reparations and others who are against, why they tell the best stories and why that matters. Theory. Why storytelling is the vehicle to move hearts and minds of Americans toward reparations. And techniques. I'll discuss how key narrative devices help the medicine go down. Today, I'm here as a journeyman storyteller and explorer, returned from the front lines in Badlands called Storyville. And I'm here to tell you how to sell the story of reparations. To start, I'll tell you my story. It's an origin story. I worked in TV and film. Some of you may probably know me from The Cosby Show or Living Single or Get Out. You may know me as the producer of the recent Good Trouble, John Lewis documentary. There he is behind me. And I'm proud to be a working actor. I'm one of the lucky ones. Because before all of that, I was just a Black girl from the mountains of Flagstaff, Arizona. My mother was a teacher. My father was an itinerant preacher. They were both orphans. They had 6 kids. We lived in the Starlight Motel's 2-bedroom shack off of Route 66. It was tough, and we did a lot of dumpster diving. I started work around 5 years old, knocking on doors, asking for jobs, sweep the porch, or take out the trash. My brothers, they were stronger. They would shovel snow. And when they got it, a $20 bill was mythological. That was the way it was until one day fate stepped in and my father, a Kojic Pentecostal and Baptist preacher, was discovered by the German Lutherans. They thought he was special and sent him to the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. And life changed for me. Suddenly, there were more opportunities. My mother sent me to an arts program in the summer. And when a Merchant Ivory independent film came to town in the 5th week of that 6-week program, they held an open call looking for girls of color to audition. I, along with hundreds of girls from the tri-state area, showed up, hoping for a miracle. When the smoke cleared, a miracle happened. They chose me for the lead. I was discovered there in a basement theater called New Freedom. That first job got me a union SAG card, health care, and a career. I was 14, and I've been trying to make good on being the one that got over ever since. Story. Now that you know mine, I'm no longer a stranger or just a face on a screen. I'm more human. And I believe in reparations for descendants for African Americans as a way to heal a nation that has yet to reform, repair, or apologize for its heinous history. Reparations will need creators and great storytellers to use their powers to lift it above the clouds. Storytelling is the most powerful tool for change in the world. See, most people cannot remember the details beyond the way something makes them feel. Story is the conduit to our mind, but once a seed is planted, it's the quickest way to our heart. My friend and mentor, Reverend William Barber II, is a master storyteller, the gold standard for the power of story and its might to create right. To have this discussion, I'll borrow his signature framework called the Third Reconstruction. In it is a moral, constitutional, and economic call for reparations. Reverend Barber, a MacArthur Genius Fellow, is senior pastor of the Greenleaf Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina. He is also co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, started by Martin Luther King Jr. Reverend Barber says, I don't separate morality from economics. I don't think America can be if she doesn't ultimately deal with this issue, the legacy of systemic racism and how it continues to hold the country back. Reverend Barber is the creator in this story, a world builder. He says, we are the architects of the Third Reconstruction. All right, now, just right there, you set up a little straighter in your seat, because with that one phrase, he recreates you as a character with a purpose in a more dynamic world. Our everyday ordinary just became mythological. He believes that you have to have a place to shift imagination, prophetic, moral imagination, before you could have the hope of political and public policy implementation. In storytelling terms, he helped me see the arcs.
All right. We can
First Reconstruction after slavery,
close
second
it out, my
after
brother.
the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Reverend Barber gave me a perspective.
All right. Thank you. So again, that was Eric Alexander talking about the power of storytelling as we close out this episode on 10 plus 2 things that are important to learn about reparations and the many, many more things that we covered in this presentation. So again, I want to thank my brother Major for working with me and and getting those images up for us during this presentation. And again, we want to thank everyone who listened in on this presentation, and we encourage you to subscribe to this channel, support us, and sharing this with other people. And you've been listening to Reparations Now podcast. Reparations now, reparations now, reparations now.